You have slept better on rainy nights your entire life. You know this. The specific heaviness that arrives in the eyelids when rain begins on the roof, the depth of sleep that follows, the sense of having slept more completely than on a dry night despite no change in mattress, pillow, room, or bedtime. The experience is so universal that every language has a word or phrase for it. Every culture recognizes it. Every person over 65 has felt it hundreds of times and never been given the mechanism. 4 mechanisms, not 1. 5. If the acoustic physics is split into its 2 components, entrainment and masking, which operate through different neural pathways despite arriving from one physical source. 5 independent systems that rain activates simultaneously, each through a different pathway, each producing a measurable effect on sleep architecture. The rain is not relaxing you. It is reorganizing the conditions under which your brain produces its deepest sleep stage. And it is doing it through physics you can hear, feel, measure, and trace to the specific neurons and hormones that govern whether you sleep lightly or deeply on any given night. Acoustic physics is first, because what rain sound does to your brainwaves during sleep is the most precisely documented of the 4 mechanisms, and the finding that makes it work is a frequency match that no one would have predicted. Sleep has stages. The deepest, NREM stage 3, slow-wave sleep, is characterized by delta oscillations, large, slow brainwaves at 0.5 to 4 Hz, produced by synchronized firing of cortical neurons across broad regions of the brain. Slow-wave sleep is the stage that consolidates memory, repairs tissue, releases growth hormone, and clears metabolic waste through the glymphatic system. It is the stage where the brain does its maintenance, the overnight repair cycle that keeps neural tissue functional and clears the metabolic byproducts that accumulate during waking hours. Slow-wave sleep is also the stage that declines most steeply with age. The person over 65 typically spends less time in slow-wave sleep than at any previous point in their life, a decline that begins in the 30s and accelerates through each subsequent decade. By 65, slow-wave sleep may constitute as little as 5 to 10% of total sleep time, compared to 20 to 25% at age 25. The decline is not benign. It is associated with reduced memory consolidation, impaired immune function, slower tissue recovery, and the accumulation of metabolic waste, including amyloid beta, that adequate slow-wave sleep would clear. Slow-wave sleep is the stage you are losing. It is also the stage rain restores. And the mechanism of restoration is a frequency match between the sound rain produces and the brainwave pattern your brain produces during its deepest sleep. Power spectrum of cortical activity during slow-wave sleep follows an approximate 1/f distribution, a mathematical pattern where energy decreases proportionally with increasing frequency. Each octave carries equal power. Lower frequencies dominate. Higher frequencies are present but progressively quieter. This spectral shape has a name: pink noise. Rain is pink noise. Each raindrop striking a surface produces a broadband acoustic impulse, a burst of sound energy across many frequencies simultaneously. The spectral content of each impact depends on the size of the droplet, the speed of impact, and the resonant properties of the surface it strikes. Large drops produce more low-frequency energy. Small drops produce more high-frequency energy. Natural rain contains a distribution of droplet sizes, from drizzle at 0.5 millimeter diameter to heavy drops at 5 millimeters or more, and the combined acoustic output of millions of droplets of varying sizes striking surfaces simultaneously produces a summed spectrum that approximates a 1/f distribution. Rain produces pink noise through the physics of stochastic impact from a power law-sized distribution of water droplets. The match between rain's acoustic spectrum and the brain's slow-wave spectrum is not designed, it is convergent. 2 unrelated physical systems producing an identical spectral shape through entirely different mechanisms. Water droplets distributed by atmospheric physics. Cortical neurons synchronized by thalamic pacemakers. Neither system has any connection to the other. Both produce 1/f distributions. The match is accidental, and the accident is what makes rain the only naturally occurring sound source that frequency matches the brain's deepest sleep stage. That frequency match, rain's spectral distribution aligning with the brain's slow-wave oscillation pattern through convergent physics rather than any causal connection between weather and neuroscience, is the accident I cannot stop thinking about in the sleep literature. Because it means the best acoustic stimulus for deep sleep was never designed. It was never engineered. It was falling from the sky every time it rained, producing the exact spectral distribution that 21st century neuroscience would identify as optimal for slow-wave entrainment. And the human brain was locking onto it for 2 million years before anyone measured either spectrum. Papalambros and colleagues at Northwestern University published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience in 2017, a finding directly relevant to the person over 65, continuous pink noise during sleep increased the proportion of slow-wave activity by 23% in older adults and improved next morning memory performance by 25%, 23% more slow-wave sleep. In older adults, the population that has lost the most slow-wave sleep and stands to benefit most from its restoration. If you have ever woken after a rainy night and felt that your thinking was clearer, your memory sharper, your cognitive function somehow better than after a dry night of equivalent duration, that finding explains why. The rain sound increased the proportion of your sleep spent in the stage where memory consolidation occurs. You did not sleep longer. You slept deeper. More of your sleep time was spent in slow-wave stages. The subjective sense of having slept better is the accurate perception of a brain that spent more time in its most restorative stage. Mechanism is neural entrainment. The auditory cortex processes the incoming acoustic signal during sleep. And because the spectral distribution of the signal matches the spectral distribution of the brain's own slow-wave activity, the auditory input reinforces the existing oscillation rather than disrupting it. The brain locks onto the sound because the sound is already doing what the brain is trying to do. White noise does not produce this effect. Its flat spectrum distributes energy equally across all frequencies, which does not match the 1/f slope of slow-wave oscillations. The specificity of the match is the mechanism. Volume does not matter. Relaxation does not matter. Frequency structure matters. Ongo and colleagues published in Neuron in 2013 that the timing matters. Acoustic stimulation, synchronized to the phase of slow oscillations during sleep, enhanced slow-wave activity, and improved overnight memory consolidation. The enhancement was specific to stimulation delivered during the upstate of the slow oscillation, the moment when cortical neurons are most excitable and most receptive to reinforcing input. Stimulation during the downstate, when neurons are in their refractory period, produced no enhancement. The brain is not passively receiving the sound. It is selectively amplifying the component of the signal that arrives at the right phase of its own oscillation. What rain provides is continuous stimulation across all phases. It does not time its droplets to your brain waves. The entrainment occurs because the brain selectively amplifies the component of the rain signal that aligns with its current oscillatory phase and ignores the rest. The useful signal is extracted from the continuous noise automatically, the way a radio receiver locks onto a carrier frequency embedded in broadband static. The rain does not need to be timed. The brain does the timing. The rain provides the raw material. The sleeping cortex selects the portion it can use. Acoustic character of rain also depends on the surface it strikes. Rain on a hard roof produces sharper, higher frequency content. The rigid surface reflects the impact energy at high frequencies. Rain on a metal roof is brighter and more percussive. Rain on vegetation, soil, or water produces softer, warmer, more low-frequency dominant sound. The yielding surface absorbs the high-frequency impact energy and radiates the low-frequency content that the 1/f distribution favors. Rain heard through an open window with earth and leaves below produces the warmest spectrum, the closest match to the brain's slow-wave distribution. This is the acoustic environment human ancestors slept in. Rain on earth, heard from a sheltered position, filtered through vegetation. Most sleep-conducive rain sound is not rain on a tin roof or rain on a window. It is rain on earth and leaves, heard at a distance, that attenuates the sharpest high-frequency impacts and delivers the warm, low-frequency dominant signal that the slow wave oscillation locks onto most efficiently. If your bedroom window faces a garden, grass, earth, trees, the rain you hear on a wet night is closer to the ancestral acoustic signal than rain heard through a window facing concrete and asphalt. The surface the rain strikes determines the spectrum that enters your bedroom. The spectrum determines the quality of the entrainment. The garden matters acoustically, not just visually. Think about what the pink noise is doing beyond entrainment. Because the second acoustic mechanism operates simultaneously and serves a different function entirely. Continuous rain sound raises the auditory masking threshold, the minimum intensity a transient sound must reach to be detected above the background. Your auditory system remains active during sleep. It continues processing acoustic input even in deep, slow wave stages, an evolutionary necessity because the sleeping organism that cannot detect an approaching threat does not survive. The auditory cortex is the sentry that never sleeps. It monitors the acoustic environment continuously, comparing incoming signals against the baseline expectation. When a signal exceeds the baseline, a sudden sound in silence, a novel frequency in a quiet room, the auditory cortex triggers a microarousal response. Transient sounds, a car door closing, a dog barking in the distance, a floorboard creaking, a partner shifting in bed, a truck passing on a nearby road, produce these microarousal responses, brief increases in heart rate, momentary lightening of sleep stage, and in some cases full awakening. These microarousals fragment sleep architecture even when you do not consciously wake. You have no memory of them in the morning, but the sleep was lighter, less time accumulated in slow wave stages. The restorative function was compromised by interruptions you never remember experiencing. If you live in an urban or suburban environment, within earshot of traffic, neighbors, household sounds, animal activity, your sleep is being fragmented nightly by microarousals you are not aware of. The sleep feels adequate. The duration is sufficient. But the architecture is compromised. The proportion of time spent in slow wave stages is reduced by each microarousal that briefly lightens the sleep stage without producing conscious awakening. You are sleeping long enough. You may not be sleeping deeply enough. And the transient sounds are the reason. The difference between a night that feels restorative and a night that feels adequate, despite identical duration, is often the difference between intact sleep architecture and fragmented sleep architecture. The fragmentation is invisible. The effect is not. What rain does is bury the transient sounds. A car door that would produce a microarousal in a silent bedroom falls below the masking threshold of continuous rain noise. The brain does not respond to what it cannot detect. Sleep architecture remains intact. The slow wave periods continue uninterrupted because the acoustic events that would normally fragment them are masked beneath the rain's continuous broadband output. The rain is not calming your brain. It is acoustically shielding your brain from the transient stimuli that fragment its deepest stages. Combination of entrainment and masking operating simultaneously is why rain is more effective than any single sleep intervention the acoustic literature has tested. Pink noise alone enhances slow wave activity through entrainment. Masking alone protects sleep architecture from fragmentation. Rain provides both through one physical source. The droplets that produce the entrainment signal also produce the masking floor. And rain adds something no artificial source replicates: naturalistic spectral variation. Each moment of rain is slightly different from the previous moment. The droplet size distribution shifts as the rain intensifies or softens. The wind changes the angle of impact. A gust produces a brief increase in high-frequency content that subsides. The variation is subtle enough that the auditory cortex habituates to the overall signal. It does not trigger arousal, but rich enough that the cortex does not fully disengage the way it does with perfectly uniform artificial pink noise. The rain holds the auditory system in a state of relaxed engagement, processing enough variation to remain gently active, not enough variation to trigger vigilance. No artificial pink noise generator replicates this balance because digital pink noise is perfectly stationary. Rain is approximately stationary, and the approximation is the feature, not the limitation. Now, the second physical system. Because the sound is only one of the signals your body receives when it rains, and the next one arrives before the first drop falls. Before rain arrives, atmospheric pressure drops in atmospheric pressure, the passage of a low-pressure weather system. Barometric pressure at sea level averages approximately 1,013 millibars. A typical rain-producing front drops pressure by 10 to 30 millibars over several hours. Your body detects this change. Baroreceptors in the carotid sinus and aortic arch, originally evolved for blood pressure regulation, respond to absolute atmospheric pressure changes as well as pulse pressure. The detection is not conscious. You do not feel the barometer dropping, but your neuroendocrine system registers the change and responds. Dismuri and colleagues published that lower barometric pressure correlates with earlier onset and higher peak amplitude of melatonin secretion. The correlation is reported but less robustly replicated than the acoustic entrainment data, fewer studies, smaller samples, and the effect size varies across populations. The proposed mechanism: atmospheric pressure influencing the pineal gland through intracranial pressure pathways. The hydraulic connection between atmospheric pressure and cerebrospinal fluid dynamics is plausible but not confirmed at the level the acoustic mechanisms described above have been. The barometric layer sits on a different evidential shelf than the Papalambros data. The direction is consistent. The confirmation is preliminary. A dropping barometer, the physical precursor to rain, may produce an earlier and stronger melatonin signal, priming your body for sleep before the first drop falls. The melatonin arrives first. The rain arrives second. Your body began preparing for sleep while the sky was still dry, responding to a pressure change. It detected through receptors calibrated to atmospheric variation across the full history of the species. Hundreds of times you have felt this without knowing the mechanism. The specific drowsiness that arrives with overcast skies and dropping pressure, hours before the first drop falls. The heaviness in the eyes on an afternoon when rain is approaching but has not yet begun. The yawn that arrives without fatigue, without exertion, without any reason. You can identify except that the sky has changed color and the air feels different. That drowsiness is melatonin, released earlier and at higher amplitude than your pineal gland would produce on a dry, high-pressure day, triggered by a barometric change. Your conscious mind cannot detect, but your neuroendocrine system has been calibrated to respond to across the entire history of the species. Well, and then the rain arrives and changes the temperature of the air entering your bedroom, because the thermal physics of rainfall operates through a mechanism that sleep physiology has identified as one of the primary triggers for sleep onset. Rain produces evaporative cooling. Each gram of water that evaporates from a surface absorbs approximately 2,260 joules of thermal energy from the surrounding air. During rainfall, evaporation from wet ground, wet vegetation, and wet surfaces lowers ambient temperature by 2 to 5 degrees Celsius. This cooled air, denser, heavier than the warm air it displaces, flows through an open window and settles into the lower portion of the bedroom where the bed is. Sleep onset requires a drop in core body temperature of approximately 1 degree Celsius. Your hypothalamic thermostat initiates this drop by dilating blood vessels in the hands, feet, and face, radiating heat outward to lower the core. The rate at which this radiation occurs depends on the temperature difference between your skin and the surrounding air. In a warm room, 23 degrees, 24 degrees, the gradient is narrow. Heat dissipation is slow. Sleep onset is delayed. In a cool room, 16 to 19 degrees Celsius, the range sleep research consistently identifies as optimal. The gradient is wide. Heat radiates efficiently. Core temperature drops within minutes. Sleep onset accelerates. Experience tells you what this means. The specific comfort of pulling a blanket over your body in a cool room. The surface of the skin warm under the covers. The air on the exposed face cool. That combination is a thermal arrangement. The hypothalamus needs the extremities warm enough to maintain vasodilation for heat radiation, the ambient air cool enough to accept the radiated heat. A warm room prevents this arrangement. A cool room enables it. Rain provides it without intervention. The outdoor air chilled by evaporative cooling, delivered through the window, settling to the level of the bed. Cooling arrives without intervention. No air conditioning, no fan, no thermostat adjustment. The outdoor air is cooled by the physics of evaporation and delivered through the window that is already delivering the pink noise. Two sleep-promoting stimuli, acoustic and thermal, arriving through one architectural opening. The window that lets in the sound also lets in the temperature your hypothalamus needs to initiate the core temperature decline that triggers sleep onset. On a dry night, you may need to set a thermostat or turn on a fan to achieve the bedroom temperature that rain provides by opening a window. On a rainy night, the physics of evaporation does the work. The delivery system is free. The calibration is automatic. The temperature the rain produces through evaporative cooling, 2 to 5 degrees below the pre-rain ambient, is the temperature range the sleep literature identifies as optimal. Consider the fourth mechanism. Because it operates below consciousness, in the threat assessment circuitry that determines how deeply your brain permits itself to sleep on any given night. And unlike the acoustic and thermal mechanisms, this one is evolutionary rather than physical. What rain does to predators is suppress their advantage. Large predators hunt less effectively in rain. Scent trails dissolve in the water. Auditory tracking is masked by the broadband noise. Visual tracking is impaired by reduced visibility. And movement through wet vegetation is louder and slower. Every sensory advantage the predator relies on is degraded by rain simultaneously. For a primate sleeping in an exposed or semi-exposed position, which human ancestors did for the vast majority of evolutionary history, rain meant the lowest predation risk of any weather condition. The safest nights to sleep deeply were rainy nights. The nights when the broadband noise masked movement, dissolved scent, and impaired the senses predators relied on were the nights when deep sleep carried the lowest survival cost. Your amygdala processes continuous broadband natural noise as a safety signal, the auditory equivalent of the birdsong signal described in that discussion, but operating through a different acoustic mechanism. The ecological logic is sound. Rain degrades every sensory advantage predators rely on. Whether the human amygdala specifically processes rain as a predator, suppression signal has not been directly measured. What is measured is the autonomic response to continuous broadband natural noise, reduced sympathetic tone, increased parasympathetic engagement, through the general mechanisms the birdsong discussion described. The specific rain as safety signal pathway is inferred from the ecological logic and the general autonomic data. It has not been isolated the way Radcliffe isolated the birdsong-specific cortisol response. The person over 65 whose amygdala vigilance has increased with age, and it does increase, the threat assessment system becoming more reactive as the body becomes more physically vulnerable, receives a signal during rain that overrides the heightened vigilance. The rain tells the amygdala what the amygdala has been calibrated to hear for 2 million years. Nothing is hunting tonight. The amygdala does not need to believe the rain. The calibration is automatic. The vigilance decreases. The sleep deepens. You see, and rain's acoustic stationarity is what separates it from thunderstorms. Steady rain produces a statistically stationary signal, average amplitude and spectral distribution remaining constant over time. Your auditory cortex, after initial processing, habituates to stationary signals, reducing its response to input that is predictable and unchanging. This habituation is the neural mechanism of the masking effect. The rain becomes part of the expected background. The auditory cortex allocates less processing to it, freeing cortical resources for the slow-wave oscillations of deep sleep. Thunder disrupts this completely. Thunder is a transient, high-amplitude, low-frequency acoustic event, exactly the profile that triggers arousal responses in the sleeping brain. Lightning flashes produce visual arousal even through closed eyelids. The retina detects the light change through the thin skin of the lid and signals the visual cortex. The storm converts a sleep-promoting stationary signal into an intermittent threat signal. Unpredictable, high-energy, demanding cortical processing that the habituated auditory cortex cannot ignore. Gentle, steady rain promotes sleep because the stationarity of the signal allows the auditory cortex to habituate. Thunderstorms disrupt sleep because the transient events, each thundercrack, each lightning flash, prevent habituation and trigger the arousal responses that the steady rain had suppressed. The difference is not volume. It is stationarity, whether the signal is predictable enough for the auditory cortex to stop attending to it. A loud, steady rain is more sleep-promoting than a quiet storm. The brain can ignore what is constant, it cannot ignore what is unpredictable. And then, the convergence. Because the question you asked at the beginning of this discussion, why do I sleep better when it rains, cannot be answered by any single mechanism. It requires all five. That convergence. Pink noise in training, slow wave oscillations, broadband masking, protecting sleep architecture from transient disruption, barometric pressure advancing melatonin onset, evaporative cooling, lowering bedroom temperature into the optimal range, and evolutionary threat assessment reading continuous broadband noise as a predator suppression signal is the convergence. I cannot find a single mechanism explanation for in the sleep literature. Because no single mechanism explains why you sleep better when it rains. All five explain it. Each is independently documented. Each operates through a different physical pathway. Each produces a measurable, specific effect on a different component of sleep physiology. And all five activate simultaneously when rain begins at night and a window is open. No pharmaceutical sleep aid activates five independent sleep-promoting mechanisms simultaneously. No sleep hygiene protocol addresses acoustic entrainment, masking threshold, melatonin timing, ambient temperature, and amygdala threat assessment in a single intervention. A sleeping pill may reduce sleep latency, the time to fall asleep, but it does not increase slow-wave activity, does not protect sleep architecture from transient noise, does not lower bedroom temperature, does not advance melatonin onset. The comparison applies to the person whose sleep is adequate but not optimal. The person over 65 who sleeps long enough but does not sleep deeply enough, whose slow-wave sleep has declined with age, whose sleep architecture is fragmented by urban transient noise. For the person with clinical insomnia, neurological sleep disorders, or conditions where an open window does not address the underlying pathology, sleep medication serves a function rain cannot replace. The comparison is not anti-medical, it is specific. Rain activates mechanisms that no single pharmaceutical targets for the population whose sleep problem is depth rather than onset. On a rainy night, open the window, even slightly. The rain sound enters unfiltered by speakers or digital processing. The full spectral complexity of millions of droplets striking earth and leaves, carrying the 1/f distribution that your slow-wave oscillations will lock onto. The cool air enters simultaneously, evaporatively chilled, denser than the warm bedroom air it displaces, settling toward floor level where it lowers the ambient temperature your hypothalamus is using to calibrate core body temperature decline. The barometric pressure has already initiated the melatonin signal hours before the first drop fell. The broadband masking has already raised the arousal threshold above every transient sound that would normally fragment your sleep. Think about the nights when it does not rain, because the mechanisms can be partially approximated even without weather. Pink noise generators and apps provide the acoustic component. They deliver the entrainment signal and the masking floor. They do not provide the evaporative cooling, the barometric melatonin signal, or the evolutionary safety cue. They do not provide the naturalistic spectral variation that real rain carries. A cool room with pink noise approximates the combined stimulus more closely than pink noise alone in a warm room. The thermal component and the acoustic component together replicate 2 of the 5 mechanisms. A cool room with pink noise and minimal light approximates 3. No indoor arrangement replicates all 5 because 2 of the mechanisms, barometric melatonin priming and evolutionary predator, suppression signaling, require atmospheric and environmental conditions that cannot be simulated. The acoustic component matters. The thermal component matters. The combination matters most. And on a rainy night, the combination arrives through one open window, unengineered, unfiltered, calibrated by the physics of water and air to the specifications the sleeping brain requires. Next time rain begins at night, the sound on the roof, the drop in temperature, the heaviness in the eyelids arriving before you have decided to feel sleepy, you will know what is happening. You will know because you now understand each mechanism individually and can feel them arriving in sequence. A 1/f spectral distribution is frequency matching your slow wave oscillations. Evaporative cooling is lowering your bedroom temperature into the range that facilitates core temperature decline. A barometric pressure drop triggered your melatonin hours before the first drop fell. Broadband masking is raising the arousal threshold for every transient sound that would otherwise fragment your sleep architecture. And somewhere in the brainstem, the threat assessment system that has been listening for predators since before the species could speak is reading the continuous noise and concluding that nothing is hunting tonight. Close the eyes. Open the window. The rain already knows what it is doing.